Hello, Horror Hound. Oh my goodness. I think the scariest thing about this mask, hello Horror Hounds, is that the hair looks like Donald Trump's. Anyway, welcome to the video that I was never going to make. Alas, poor Michael. I knew him, Horatio. I suspect the title of this video may already put some teeth on edge. Rob Zombie's additions to the Halloween franchise are still, probably it's fair to say, two of the most hotly contested horror films of the last decade, if not longer. Loved by some, loathed by many. But recently I've been asked by a few people whether I'm going to rank any more franchises. And can I rank the Halloween franchise is one of the suggestions that comes up. Understandably, it's one of the big three: Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. End of October this year, round Halloween time, as a treat to myself, after having recently watched Lords of Salem for the first time, and that movie got under my skin, got into my head. Done a review of it if you're at all interested. So I wanted to return to Rob Zombie's Haddonfields. But what I did was I watched John Carpenter's Halloween and the original Halloween 2 back to back first, and then the next day I watched Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2 back to back to sort of compare and contrast them. And I have some thoughts. First off, when Zombie got the gig to remake Halloween, it's a matter of record that he reached out and had a conversation with John Carpenter, and John Carpenter's one bit of advice was make it your own, tell your own story. And you can't fault Zombie for having done that. In this world of remakes and IP and franchises, where we have a sort of spreadsheet box ticking Friday the 13th remake and a corporate abomination of a Nightmare on Elm Street remake, you can't deny that, love it, loathe it, or indifferent to it, Rob Zombie put his stamp on the Michael Myers myth. He told his version of Halloween. These two films are not some regurgitated demographic chasing soulless pieces of commerce. These are Rob Zombie movies. The first director in the franchise since John Carpenter, I would argue, to put his stamp on these movies. Think about that for a second. The first director since John Carpenter to put his stamp on these movies. So after watching these films back to back, what conclusions have I reached? First, foremost, and most importantly, John Carpenter's Halloween is an untouchable, undeniable classic. Peerless. The straightforward story he tells of a killer who escapes from an asylum some 20 or so years after the horrific murder he perpetrated as a child, and then returns to the town, and on the night he returns, more murder follows in his wake. The obvious Hitchcockian feel to it, the precision of the filmmaking and the story he's telling is practically untouchable. But by the time Zombie came to make his film, this was a franchise where the rot had set in a long time ago. So he kind of really wasn't remaking Halloween. He was making his own Halloween. And I would argue that the myth of Michael Myers had been well and truly spoiled long before Rob Zombie. Further than that, I'm tempted to be as bold as to say that the rot started to set in with the original Halloween 2, which when viewed back to back with John Carpenter's Halloween, yeah, it's nice that it picks up straight away, but it's not that good. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who created Halloween and wrote Halloween 2, and I think John Carpenter, since, with hindsight, has said that he's not happy with the story that they told. They had to come up with something. And I believe what they came up with, revealing Laurie to be Michael's sister, starts to chip away at the mystique and the mystery of a character that is in the original just a cipher, blank-faced, unexplained, evil, just pure evil, as Dr. Loomis says. And part of the unknowable, the mind behind the mask, is part of the genius of that pared down tale from the original film. And it starts getting chipped away at almost instantly in the sequel. The mystique and the mystery of Michael starts to vanish, and then as more films come in the franchise, the mystique lessens and lessens and lessens. So by the time Rob Zombie's making his film, is there really any point in making that movie again, in pretending that the franchise doesn't exist and going back to the blank-faced mask and the unknowable? Zombie obviously decided that the answer was no, and that his films would do a complete 180 on the previous approaches. His films are about Michael Myers, and a lot of people lost their minds with the first hour. The first hour of his first film that spends time with Michael as a child, and we see his family and we see his background, his first kill, all the time he spends in the asylum with Loomis, and then in the asylum as a grown man before he escapes, and then we even get to what might even be recognizable as a remake of John Carpenter's Halloween. So there's no cat and mouse, there's no stalker element to it, there's no now you see me, now you don't games with the audience. His Michael is center screen, blunt, harsh, brutal, just like the two movies that he made, like being run over by a truck. There are times when Scout Taylor Compton as Laurie, and especially Danielle Harris as Annie Brackett, do a fantastic job in selling the fear, the sheer terror that comes with being in the presence of Michael when he unleashes his rage. At times it's incredibly difficult to watch, but Rob Zombie has decided to make a couple of films that are very clear about how sickening violence actually is, clear in showing the effects of violence. He'll show victims in extreme states of distress, either just before dying or in some cases pulling through. And then in Halloween 2 shows the ramifications of those cycles of violence, which is something that is practically unique in the horror genre, let alone the slasher genre. Now, if you don't like these kind of movies, that's fine. You don't have to like Rob Zombie's Halloween or his Halloween 2. If you don't care for this type of brutality, this type of violence, or this type of storytelling, if you don't like the kind of characters that he talks about, that's absolutely fine. I'm not defending these movies to try and tell you you're wrong for disliking them. But if you dislike these movies just because they're not John Carpenter's movies, then step right up, folks, because I have an entire franchise of Halloween movies that aren't John Carpenter's Halloween for you to watch. So you need to go just as crazy over those as you do over the Rob Zombie movies. Another thing that fans of the originals point at Zombies movies to is the character of Dr. Loomis, played by Malcolm McDowell in these movies. They see it as a betrayal of the character. They don't like how he's changed the character of Michael and explain Michael away, and they don't like how he's portrayed Dr. Loomis as a completely self-centered bastard. Now, I would say one of the upsides to Michael's story continuing beyond the first film is it became a showcase for Donald Pleasence. It was an excuse to see more Donald Pleasence on screen, which is always a great thing. And it turned Dr. Loomis into a sort of Cassandra figure, but a heroic figure as well. Always prophesying the truth, but doomed to have no one believe him. Always trying to put himself in the way of that evil, between the evil and the innocent, and that's great. There's probably more story to be told with Loomis than there ever was with that Michael Myers. Rob Zombie's films, as I said earlier, are about Michael Myers, and he's at the centre of a vortex that represents a cycle of violence. He is a force of nature in these films, and anyone who gets caught up in the whirlwind of his rage, psychosis and mania doesn't come away unaffected. And even Dr. Loomis in this, the man who spent more time with Michael than anyone else on the planet, does not walk away completely untouched. He gets to a point, and I can understand this, where he thinks, all these years I've invested, where's my break? Where's my cut? Where's my pot at the end of the rainbow? Could you really blame him for cashing in on the insight he has into such a notorious killer in this universe, when books about serial killers and media around real life serial killers is such big business? Could you honestly say that you wouldn't? I can't say that I wouldn't. So just as this is a different Michael, it's a different Loomis, it's a different Laurie. So again, if you're disliking it because it's not the original, then you're not dealing with these two films on their own terms. And ultimately that's unfair to these movies. You may decide, hang on, I still don't like them. Again, that's absolutely fine. So the reason I can't properly rank the Halloween franchise is because the only way I can watch these two movies is as one movie. I've got a very similar thing with Kill Bill. There's no point watching Kill Bill Volume 1 and not straight away watching Volume 2. There's no point watching Volume 2 on its own. It's one whole story. The one half doesn't ultimately make sense without the other, and I feel exactly the same way about Rob Zombie's movies. On their own, they're wildly uneven. Before Part 2 existed, I can completely understand why people lost their nut at this film. It's horrendously unbalanced. It spends an hour delving into the past of Michael, as we said, and then seems to then rush into a really quick do-over of the original film, and then just fucking ends, and you're left thinking, well, what the fuck was that? It's badly paced, it's badly structured, and only makes sense when this comes around. And as a standalone film, this doesn't make sense. You have to understand the background of this film to get any appreciation of Halloween 2. When they're put together, though, you have what I consider to be quite a remarkable 4-act structure for the complete tale of Michael Myers, of Rob Zombie's Michael Myers. Act 1 is the first half of the first film that grounds Michael in a reality, in our world. It means that strangely, once he's grown and puts the mask on, rather than being the blank canvas that Carpenter employed, I see the boy, and that's a very strange feeling. To have a human connection with this remorseless killer, but for it to be a child that you see behind the mask. There's a dynamic there that you've never really had in a slasher movie. The second half of this film, Act 2, is a condensed version of John Carpenter's original. And then if you watch it back to back, you go straight into the first Act 3, the first half of this film, which is a condensed version of Halloween 2. Now, some people lose their minds and say, but it's all a dream sequence. It's an absolute waste of time. It's completely pointless. The kills in that section, they don't even count because it's a dream. If you need your murders in these films to count, if you're keeping your tally like that, then go watch Halloween Resurrection, where the guy in the asylum with Laurie keeps all of the serial killer tallies in his head, because these movies really aren't for you. I think that dreamy, through a dark lens, reinvestigation of Halloween 2, which, as I've said earlier, and I stand by, isn't a very good film, is better than the original Halloween 2. And then the fourth act, the second half of Halloween 2, brings everything really full circle for me. The end of the cycle of violence, uncomfortable, unflinching. But this story that started grounded in a reality brings you all the way back round to, especially with the death of Annie Brackett, the uncomfortable reality of violence. I will say that I think the ending of Halloween 2 is flawed. I think it's a missed opportunity. I know it's completely different in the director's cut. I haven't watched the director's cut, but I've watched the alternative ending, the ending where everyone dies. Basically, this ending appears to be Laurie survives but goes insane, and the madness is now passed on to her. Whereas the ending of the director's cut, everyone dies, which I know a lot of people prefer. The theatrical ending of this has got its fans. I suppose the everyone dies ending lends it more of a feeling of the operatic, of the Greek tragedy. You know, the end of Hamlet, the everyone dies ending is maybe apposite. Those of you who can't quite get past the idea of Laurie dying and not being the hero, I point you again to Halloween Resurrection, that I would say does a disservice to the original Laurie Strode much more than the rounded, grounded, real Laurie we get in there. You might not like this Laurie, but she's a hell of a lot more three-dimensional than we eventually get in Halloween Resurrection. I'd suggest that there's a real pathos to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. No one is left untouched by Michael's actions from the first film and now continuing into this second film, not least Sheriff Brackett, with an amazing performance by Brad Dourif. Absolutely heartbreaking. People are either infected by him or turned to their darker impulses, as Loomis is by him. They're either suffering trauma, both physical or mental, post-traumatic, through their interaction with Michael. There's a sense of folie à deux, a shared madness that Laurie has with Michael, that sort of connection. All of these aspects, though, are present in alternate forms in some way or another in all of the previous Halloween films, explaining away Michael, one of the biggest bugbears of people who really hate Rob Zombie's Halloween, explaining away Michael, already done in Halloween 2, already done in Halloween 4 and 5, really badly done in Halloween 6, that whole weird Cult of Thorns stuff. Now don't get me wrong, I like all of these movies, but most of these movies are fucking dumb, and that Cult of Thorn nonsense, if you prefer that explanation for Michael to this one, that's that's fine. The extended scenes of Loomis with a young Michael, it's already been done. The TV edit of the original Halloween, there's a scene with that in there. The PTSD that Laurie suffers in Halloween 2, it's already been done. Laurie's alcoholism and nightmares and PTSD in H20. She's in a fucking institution at the start of Halloween Resurrection. Talk about spitting on a beloved heroine. The psychic link, the folie à deux between Laurie and Michael in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, already done. Jamie in Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. It's all, they're all already there. So apart from Busta Rhymes kung fu kicking Michael, in a weird kind of way, what Zombie's done is not just taken Michael's story into more into our reality, but he's, apart from the Cult of Thorns stuff as well, he's remixed an awful lot of what's already there in the Halloween franchise, not just John Carpenter's movie and not just Halloween 2. So yeah, as standalone movies, flawed, undoubtedly. I can't view them as standalone movies. They're two parts of a whole, the story of Michael Myers in 4 acts, as I've tried to explain, with the middle 2 acts being the original Halloween 1 and Halloween 2. But before that, the prelude to that, and the conclusion to Rob Zombie's story, fleshing out something that feels like a tragedy, does feel like a Greek tragedy, feels like an opera. I think they're very powerful works. If you're willing to hear a different tale of Michael Myers, this is the only one that does it. Otherwise, by all means, watch him come back from the dead yet again and attempt to stalk and kill his increasingly shrinking bloodline. But it means that I can't properly rank the Halloween franchise, because I'm looking at one movie. I'm holding up one movie. It's the only way for me that the story makes sense. I hope some of that made sense to you.